You're listening to Widowed AF with
Rosie Gill-Moss
and Lucinda Boast.
We've invited some members of the world's most exclusive club to bravely share their stories.
Join us for some honest conversations about living a different life, the crushing lows, the surprising highs, and everything in between.
Please note this is a podcast about death. Carefully read the episode descriptions and be kind to yourself.
But for now, welcome to our podcast.
Let's begin. Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. You are with us for our Friday chats. So you just have me today, I'm afraid, guys. Lulu has been unavoidably detained, not in the prison sense, I hasten to add. So I'm going to just ask my, as I lovingly call him, my live husband to pop up every now and then and give a little bit of insight so you haven't just got to listen to me talking the whole time. So this is John. Hello, John.
Hi.
So many of you will be familiar with John. His episode is number 4, if anybody missed it.
5.
Sorry, 5. He is also a widow and the lucky recipient of the award of being my second husband. So let's begin, shall we? We are going to be talking a little bit about Liz's episode that you heard on Monday. Obviously, this was another quite difficult listen because it does involve suicide. And it left us sort of reflecting quite a lot on what we've heard, and particularly, I guess, mental health around men. It's becoming a much more prevalent issue. Sadly, we do know several people who've lost loved ones to suicide. So I guess it's one of these horrible subjects that we just have to talk about because, like so many others, it really does live in the dark, doesn't it? And John, you're a bloke. Who did you talk to when Sarah died? I know you had some counselling, but what about, just like bloke mates? Do you guys talk about this stuff?
Not really, if I'm honest. But that's probably more me than my circle of friends. I very much put this protective coat on after Sarah died. I took myself off to counselling. That was the place that I did my crying and my reliving and all the rest of it. But, my friends and my work colleagues, I felt that they didn't want to hear me or they didn't want to see the wailing widow, so to speak. So it was more of a self-imposed thing. It's nothing that they did.
I think men do worry possibly even more than women do about becoming a burden, and there's still very much that sort of stiff upper lip idea, isn't there? And obviously what we hear from Liz's episode is that Steve had battled mental health for a long time. This was not an out of the blue episode, which sadly we've had some sort of messages in from people who had absolutely no warning. And God, I mean, I don't know whether it makes it worse or not. I don't know. The whole thing is just so traumatic, and it must just blow ripples through your world for so long. One of the things that we did hear back actually was sort of how generous of spirit, how sort of magnanimous Liz was in the way she spoke about people crossing the road to avoid her and things. And it's very easy to get quite bitter about that when you're widowed or bereaved, because you feel like people are ignoring you or rejecting you, whereas actually what she was able to identify is it's far more likely to be their fear of saying the wrong thing.
We've had quite a few of the similar messages of how do you tell a young child that their parent has killed themselves? Like both me and you, we have the experience of telling our children that their parent had died, but when a parent kills themselves, like, where do you even start?
Yeah, and it's really confusing for the child because the initial reaction, they are not emotionally mature enough to understand that it is not actually a choice that the parent made. That to get to the point where you take your life, it is no longer a choice. They genuinely believe that the world would be better without them. And the idea that we kind of, the shame stigma associated to it is, I guess, this idea that it's a selfish choice, whereas it isn't. It's desperation. But a child obviously is far too young to be able to understand that and certainly articulate it. And in their peer groups, particularly, I'm going to say young children, but then, teenagers. And as a teenager, telling your mates that, let's be honest, there's always a worry that you're going to get bullied, which sounds ridiculous, but unbelievably it does happen. So we actually, because we had quite a few of these sorts of questions which were related to kids, actually, I think people really honed in on this idea of the children in this situation. And I know 2 of Liz's children were older, they're adults really, but it's still their parents. So I actually reached out to Debbie, who is one of the founders of Holding On Letting Go, which is a children's bereavement support charity. As you know, I'm sort of saying this for the listeners. And she very kindly agreed to come on the pod. So what you're going to hear next is a very nice conversation between her and Lulu, where she explains a little bit more about the impacts of sudden death and in particular suicide on children and how everybody can help them really get through it, because it's it really comes down to this kind of village mentality that it takes more than the immediate family to support a child through a loss like this, And I do think this is where we need to get to, is this idea that we talk very openly about loss and how to support people. But anyway, I won't ramble on anymore. I will let the expert do the talking. So enjoy this conversation with Lulu and Debbie, and you'll hear me pop back up at the end.
Debbie, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast this morning. We really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. I've been listening into your podcast and they're really interesting and very thought-provoking. So it's a real pleasure to be invited to talk today.
Oh, coming from you, that means a lot. Thank you so much. Now, Debbie, you're co-founder of Holding On Letting Go, which is an amazing local charity in Kent. Can you tell us a little bit about the charity, how it started up, what motivated you to start it up?
Sure. So my background is nursing. So at the time when the charity first started, I was working as one of the nursing team at Demelza, the Children's Hospice at Sittingbourne. And as part of that, we were getting lots of the local community coming in and asking if we were able to support families outside of the hospice around their bereavement needs, especially when it was connected with children that were bereaved. And because we had finite resources at that point for the hospice, we had to look slightly differently how we would manage that. So a group of like-minded professionals got together and we all sort of volunteered our time. Demelza volunteered the venue, and it all started from a kind of little acorn, really. And those weekends programs started, and we ran 3 a year. We thought that'll be plenty. We won't need to extend. That'll be managing that. And it just grew and grew and grew. Once the word was out there, what we were doing, people tapped in and wanted to have that opportunity to kind of let their children have that support that wasn't available anywhere else.
Can you tell us about what these weekends entail?
It is a non-residential weekend. So the children arrive at 9:15 and they leave at 4. Mind you, by the end of Saturday, normally they don't want to go home. They'd like a sleepover. We separate the children into 2 age groups, really. So junior and secondary levels of schooling age groups. That's what we work with. And then within that peer group for them, the children have lots of different therapeutic interventions throughout the weekend to help them deal with their thoughts, feelings, emotions, memory making, and about actually reducing that sense of loneliness and isolation, which often many of the children felt that they had, because often they feel they're the only ones that this has happened to, because typical English, we don't talk about death and dying and all of that normally. So often they feel quite isolated with that. So to come together with their peers and recognise that actually they're not the only ones that are going through this. There's a tremendous bond of friendship that's instantly connected because of that particular poignant reason why they've come together. So that weekend, and those friendships come together and they last. So beyond the weekend, families link up, meet again, all the social events that we have, they come back to. And there's that kind of ongoing then support, which runs into the social side, separate from the actual therapeutic side. So there's that kind of thing that happens for the children and the young people. There's also a parent carer group that runs, because we recognise that actually a lot of the time the parents were needing that support. They needed that space to be able to tell their own story about what's happened to them and their family, and kind of almost confiding about the issues that they were struggling with, because often we hear from parents and carers that actually outside people don't really want to know that, actually, friends and that, they get on with their normal lives. People are really in tune with when death first arrives. They want to be able to support, but as time goes on, those months, those weeks, those years later, actually that kind of support often filters a bit. So for them to come together with other parents and carers that were in that same situation, about actually we're struggling with these things. Are we the only family that's struggling with that? No, actually, there's all of us here, and there's that natural conversation that goes on between parents and carers, and you see on people's faces there's that sense of recognition. Actually, I'm not alone with this. Others are struggling with this. About coping with anniversaries, coping with Christmases, a change in school, and actually having to tell a new set of people that actually there's been a key significant bereavement within that family, and the impacts that's still lasting, rather than actually it being forgotten about and, and go to a different school. And then all of a sudden that child or young person is caught on the back step by something that is said, or a lecture or a study lesson that's taking place that actually provokes something around that bereavement for them. I think for parents to have that opportunity to talk about their grief journey, but then also experience some of the activities that the children are doing. So they're tapping into actually their own stuff and exploring that. Then when the children and the parents come back together at the end of each day, they're able to share what they've been doing together. And there's that real kind of eagerness to actually want to talk about what's gone on, what they've been doing. And then that opens the doorway to conversations about lots of other things around the bereavement that's happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Rosie and I know the power of peer support amongst us as parents, as lone parents, widows without children. That peer support is so vital in those early days and ongoing through the years. We're both a few years down the line. So to hear that children get the opportunity to do that is amazing. And also they have the opportunity to build a bond with their parents. And that bond is so important after they've lost a parent and we've lost our spouse. The relationship between us and our children becomes vital, doesn't it, to their development?
Absolutely. And we see it time and time again where perhaps the children have been following the parents' lead, where the parents putting on a brave face and doesn't show any emotion or tries to not talk about the person that has died anymore. They see that as a signal about, oh, well, mum or dad or aunt or uncle or grandma, nobody's talking about it, so we shouldn't either. And then there's kind of this silence of conspiracy about not mentioning it. So there's no way for them to express themselves. So actually, it's really important that parents feel comfortable in sharing how they're feeling. Shared tears is good as tears. That's always what we say.
Yeah. And I mean, families come to you with a huge variety of stories and they've lost people in lots of different ways. But something that we are seeing an increase of is suicide amongst particularly young men under 45. And I know that you must have experienced families coming through your doors who have gone through this. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think suicide and that sudden unexpected death is so much more difficult to cope with for families where there's not been a recognised illness or that there can be a clear now why somebody has died. When it's been sudden and so unexpected like that, I think that's another layer of complexity for families to deal with around their grief. And also there's such a lot of media intrusion and press intrusion at those times when something around that unexpected death, whether that is linked with suicide or some other form of unexpected, the fact that families are bombarded with press intrusion, and some of the families that we have worked with over our years of running the charity feel that actually their life is being exposed on social media or in the press, and actually they've got no control over it. So that's where we try and help them feel slightly more empowered about that actually they have the control about sharing their information with their family and their friends before it try and gets out in that media, about having that courage to talk about it and be more open with children and young people and other family members around what has gone on as soon as possible, rather than children and young people hearing it from other people at the school gate or within their own peer group during the class or something like that, where it's come up totally unexpectedly and the child or young person is really floored by that. So it's about us. As soon as a family make connection with us, we try and work with them right from before we even start the weekend programme about supporting them and being able to talk to family members around finding the right terminology, around getting them as adults in that right place to be able to then have the energy, the willpower and the strength to talk to their children about what has gone on. Obviously in age appropriate conversation, simple clear language is really, really clear for the children. No euphemisms used or anything like that.
We've talked about that a lot, actually, using that black and white language with children. It's so important, isn't it? Both of us lost our husbands in sudden circumstances. But I mean, with suicide, it's such a unique and isolating thing for the families left behind, isn't it? And, as I said, we are seeing an increase. And are you feeling that, holding on, letting go? Are you seeing an increase in people bereaved by suicide?
Yes, and sort of, especially since the pandemic, really, I think that that period, which hit a lot of people in so many different ways, ended up with people's mental health being affected a lot more. And we noticed over that period of time that our traumatic death rules increased double from what we would have normally had in that period of time. So the workload for supporting those families, we needed to prioritise. And we noticed more around actually a lot of really young people. So we've done a lot of work in schools recently where we've been working with the whole class or key peers within that class that have had that close connection to the person that has died through suicide, because that age group, there's nowhere for them to go. So they get online and they're all talking or chatting with each other online, which is good for that, but that actually they need that other professional support coming in and supporting them as well to help them find a way through and have that sort of clarity about moving forward for the future and about memory making in a positive way rather than being stuck with all the negative stuff that perhaps they've been exposed to at that time.
I know that you guys are based in Kent and are such a wonderful resource for local families, but are there any online resources for children and young people bereaved by suicide that you could signpost to?
Yeah, so obviously we cover the whole of Kent and South East London. So that's our catchment area. So it's a massive patch that we will cover. So we will do obviously work with individual families. So not necessarily a weekend programme. We will do work in schools with groups. Some people want just the support packs that we can send out and then they want to find their own way. So we can offer a lot of different things to people at different times. We also do something called a bereavement cafe. So some family members might perhaps want to come along to that. So there's lots of stuff we offer internally, but we also have got lots of different resources, like you say, websites, reading materials that we give out to families. And I'm more than happy to send some stuff through to you that perhaps you can put on your site that people can look. And what we'll do is we'll put it in age appropriate groups as well. So people don't have to sift through everything themselves. And when they're trying to find the headspace to do that, it will be done for them. So I can easily send that through to you.
Thanks so much, Debbie. That's really good because a lot of our little people do have attachment issues after losing a loved one, and they worry about the parent too, particularly those whose parent has taken their own life. They worry about the other one, and they're very hypersensitive, like you say, to their remaining parents' mood swings and everything else. And it makes us feel this huge sense of responsibility, which we have already as parents. But what stage do people come to you, Debbie? Do you find they come to you in the early days or further down the line?
Well, we used to say ideally sort of post 6 months of bereavement, because we felt that at that point that the other family members would have gone back to work and got on with lives, family and friends have gone back on. And then that's often when the cracks would start to show. And people would think, actually, we need some extra support now. Actually, saying that since the pandemic hit, we've kind of thrown that out with the bathwater now because people were needing that support a lot earlier. So from the time that actually they make a phone call or do an email, however they want to communicate with us, once we've made that connection, they would get the support pack sent out to them. So that gives them more information around what we do, our whole sort of gambit of what we do, as well as the weekends. There would be separate stuff within that pack that family members can do for themselves. So ideas around memory making, ideas about how to cope with difficult feelings. So that would be there for them to carry on and do for themselves if they've wanted to. And then when we make that conversation with them face to face or over the phone around how we're going to move things forward, it might be that the family would prefer a home visit. So we could easily arrange that to go and talk to them face to face. That often gives children an opportunity to kind of almost check us out in a way, be able to ask questions, and we provide as much information as we can. Obviously, some things we'd like to keep back because we want it to be a little bit of a surprise on the programme that we're doing, because there's lots of fun and laughter. It's not all doom and gloom by any means. There's lots of fun and laughter, and we get really mucky and really dirty during the weekends as well. So there's some little things we keep back, but normally at that point, we've managed to engage them. And the fact that they're really keen to come along, waiting that 6 months is too long. So we try and get them on a programme as soon as possible. And it might be that if we feel that there's a family that would benefit, although still coming on a weekend, but perhaps need that individual work to help them as a family as a whole move forward, then we would start doing that before the weekend. So the weekend's almost the icing on the cake, but they've had all the layers of support in between that.
I suppose it's going to be different for every family that you engage, isn't it? Their level of need and when they need it. So that's amazing that you're
Absolutely.
able to do that. Absolutely amazing. And I know that one of your volunteers is somebody that has benefited from your services in the past too.
We've got quite a lot of young people that have been through the programme that are really keen to help us and move things forward. And actually, for some of the teenagers that have been used through our programme, we're using them to actually, when we're putting anything out for teenagers, can you have a little look at this stuff that's really right for you? And we've got some that are really great with graphics. We might say to them, you couldn't do a bit of graphics to help us with this that we think that we're doing. Had a group of teenagers at one school we were working with that actually did some hashtags for us around grief. And that was brilliant. They came up with much more interesting ones that their peer group would engage with than we would come up with. So, yeah, it's really about, getting as much help from people that have been through the experience themselves to be on board.
Yeah, it helps to continue to inform what you do, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
That's amazing, honestly.
I think it's just for me to say that, for us as Holding On Letting Go, we believe that there's few major life events more impactful than a bereavement, and that grief is normal and necessary, and actually that it's not an illness or something to get over. It's about everybody taking that journey at their own pace. And our help is there whenever anybody needs it. And if it's not us that can help, then we'll definitely find somebody who can for you. So please don't be out there alone. Please make contact if you need any help with anything.
Wow, that was actually more powerful than I was expecting it to be for me personally, because I have experience firsthand of the work that Holding On Letting Go do. But it was hearing Debbie say in words that we use to describe adult grief, the peer support, the friendships, the isolation. And this is stuff that we talk about all the time on here with our guests, is, not wanting, how important it is to tell your story, to talk about your grief and not feel isolated. And I suppose, yes, I guess we all know it's important for children to do it, but hearing it back like that gave me real goosebumps.
I know the power of sharing their story with other kids, and I guess kids are more inclined to keep it to themselves, particularly if they've lost their parent in a sudden way, or if they've taken their own life. They, that horrible sense of shame they feel, which isn't fair. It's not theirs to carry. So to have the opportunity to let that out of their little bodies and, into the open and not have someone react with a face or a head tilt must be really powerful for them.
I also really picked up on what she was saying about them liaising with schools and with the friends of the bereaved child. And I thought, wow, it reminded me of, the message we had from Meg where she talked about buying the books for her children so they could support their friends. And I thought that's actually what the world needs, isn't it? It's that kind of, the village mentality. Let's all wrap around and help this kid that's had this loss of this enormous magnitude. And yet teenagers as well, of course. You see, my children were really young, and your daughter was very young too. So you forget that teenagers, of course, the last thing you want as a teenager is to feel different.
Yeah. I mean, Liz's 3 kids were at 3 different ages and 3 totally different stages of their development. And the children that Debbie has seen come through Holding On Letting Go are at all different stages. So to find enough resources to tailor to each of those kind of stages is amazing.
Now, I'm not virtue signalling here, but I do volunteer for Holding On Letting Go as well. And I have worked at a few of these weekends. I'd seen firsthand the impact it had on me attending the weekend and my eldest son, who also attended. But to see it from the other side and to watch these children, I guess, almost come back to life is how I would describe it. They come in and they're very quiet and shy, or they're sort of over talking and sort of bouncing around a bit. And then they calm and they form friendships and they start to gradually talk. And yeah, I guess that's the only way to describe it, is that they come back to life. And Debbie did mention at the end of the interview that they supported one of Liz's children at the time. So it really does create this the way I describe Holding On Letting Go, okay, is I felt like doors were being slammed in my face, left, right and centre. I could not get help for my children or myself, and it was a terrible analogy knowing the way my husband died, but it felt like I was drowning. And Debbie rang me. She returned my call, for starters, and she just said to me the words I needed to hear, which were, "We will help you." And it felt like being hugged. And I have never forgotten that moment of kindness when I needed it, which is why they remain very, very close to my heart.
I bet. I mean, what you say about doors being closed in your face, I experienced that too, when you're just not getting the answers, you're not getting comfort from anyone, because no one can comfort you. You know, in your case, your husband wasn't going to walk through the door, and mine wasn't, and you couldn't fully explain what had happened to them. You didn't need anyone to do that. You just wanted somebody to be there to listen and say, it's okay. You don't have to have all the answers, but there are things that you can do to help yourself, and we're here for you. That's all you really want, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've personally, when I listened to that, I'm always banging on about my tingle that's on my face and things, but I felt all my sort of, hairs in the back of my neck stand up when she talked about the impact of sudden death. And whilst, losing a parent under any circumstances is horrific, the suddenness to a child, I guess that jolt, the literal overnight change in their entire universe. It's powerful, isn't it? And these poor kids, and then to have to explain to them that, the parent in this situation took their own life. It's enormous undertaking for the person left behind, isn't it?
It is, and they don't always want to talk about it. They will internalise their pain, disappear to their bedrooms, and you don't know what's going on in their heads. So to have these resources to encourage them to let it out is really, really unique and powerful, and something that, I really hope kids are able to access.
Well, we've seen firsthand the enormous impact of peer support on both ourselves and our children, because due to the nature of us having a network of widowed friends, they mix with other bereaved children, and it does make them feel less of this isolation. And also, this idea that they're allowed to have fun. I really like that Holding On, Letting Go embrace this, because there is a lot of laughter on the weekends. As I worked on, they had some teenage girls who didn't like the clay getting under their nails. There was much hilarity, and rubber gloves were sourced to protect us. They managed to find light in a very dark place, and I think in the world in which we inhabit as widowed and as bereaved families, that is a very special thing.
It is. Connection is so powerful amongst us as adults, and for kids it must be even more so. I know my daughter goes to school sometimes, and I check in with her and I say, do your classmates know that your dad died? No, I don't really want to talk about it, she says, and I don't want to make people sad, and that breaks my heart. And I think if I could find a way to explain to her that it's okay to share it with her class, I can't guarantee their reaction, but if I can arm her with the tools that, that Debbie talked about, then I think that would really help her.
Yeah, because she was at school. So Monty and Hector were at school. And the school were fairly supportive, and they held an assembly for the older children and sort of explained to them what had happened before the boys went back to school. But yes, it is the sort where they transition to get a little bit older, I think, and the choice is theirs to make, because my oldest, I don't believe, has told any of his peers at school. I have obviously informed the school, and they're aware, but unless he has recently, he hadn't told anybody. And that, of course, is their choice. It's their story to tell as and when. But listening to Debbie talk, I am wondering whether I should sort of look into some teenage support networks for him, because it is the recurring theme, isn't it, that peer support is so important, particularly these boys where they tend to keep a lot of their feelings inside. It's important to get them talking, isn't it?
It is, and also to encourage them. I remember being at school, in high school, and if somebody shared something as personal as that with me, I felt really honoured that they'd done that, and I really hope that, our teenagers find people that are able to hear what they've got to say. And Debbie talked about some of the resources that they use at Holding On, Letting Go in their weekends, and I know that she's going to share them with us, so we will share them on our social media, so people listening to this are able to access it and hopefully get some help for their kids.
Something actually that might be worth mentioning is we have been asked on more than one occasion about ideas to help people support their friends who've been bereaved. Perhaps another conversation to be had is, parents of non-bereaved children, maybe sort of talking to them about, encouraging their friends to talk, or the importance of keeping confidences and showing empathy and that sort of thing. I mean, most of us do that anyway, but I guess just having more conversations about death means that it becomes less of a taboo, which means that people are more likely to talk, which means that we take away all the shame and isolation. So, yeah, essentially it comes down to just, having the confidence to talk, isn't it?
It does. And, I know that parents of some of Scarlett's closest friends have actually approached me separately and asked, how can we talk to our girls about supporting Scarlett, which is wonderful. So, yeah, to have conversations about helping non-bereaved kids to support our kids could be really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just we just got to keep this dialogue going in schools, at home, around the dinner table sometimes if you hear of somebody that has had a bereavement, because it needs to be a subject we stop shying away from. But anyway, on that note, because we certainly don't shy away from yakking on about it, do we?
Never.
We are back with you on Monday with Julie, and she's going to be sharing her story with us.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you for listening today. We'll be back with you soon for more from the front line of loss.
But for now, as you were.